Everyone, welcome to our monthly One Thing webinar series. Every single month, we sit down with an author that we believe their message and their book is aligned with the one thing. And today you are in for a sweet, sweet treat. Last year, I had the pleasure to go and speak at an event called Relentless MV, and MV stands for Martha's Vineyard, which was on my wife's bucket list. And when I was there, I met a lot of really amazing people. And one of the people who was also speaking is the man that you are going to meet today. He's got a pretty interesting track record. I think for a lot of us, we consider ourselves to be high achievers and we're striving for big things in our professional and our personal life. He has started 4 technology companies. He's raised over $50 million in venture capital. He's sold 3 of those companies. And if that isn't impressive enough for his hobbies, he came in second in the Olympic trial. He holds 3 world records for mountain biking, and he's just your average guy. So today we're here to have a chat with Patrick Sweeney and talk about his brand new book, Fear is Fuel. Patrick, welcome, my friend.
Hey, Jeff, great to be here. And I'm not sure if your listeners caught on to this little nuance of your introduction about where we met, that you said, you were speaking there, I was speaking there. It was great, really impressive place. We're in this 5-star resort. And you said it was on your wife's bucket list. Now, the question to you is, where was your wife?
She didn't earn the right to come last year because we couldn't find a sitter, but she's coming this year, my friend. So we're all sharing.
There you go. We can all bunk up together. I'll look forward to that. Well, thank you so much for having me on board, and I really appreciate all your listeners taking some time. I know everyone's day is busy, and taking some time out in the middle of the day really means a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive into Fear is Fuel and helping people understand how they can leverage that in whatever they define as their one thing, let's dive into your track record a little bit more. I mean, starting 4 companies, you've had immense success as an athlete. Where did this all begin?
Well, it all began actually with a really poor motivation, and that's kind of what led to my transformation. And I hope everyone here, my goal is that everyone who's listening, who might have been in the same scenario I was in, or might be coming out of that scenario, can ask themselves, what would I do if fear never got in my way? What would I do if I just had unlimited confidence, if I had unshakable courage? It took me 37 years to learn that, but what I was originally doing was trying to cover up for, a pretty rough childhood with an abusive grandfather, bullies where I lived, first generation Irish immigrant growing up in the blue collar areas of Boston. And so the way that I originally thought I'd create a persona for me, I'd create something that was worthy of love and attention and everything else, was athletics. So I gravitated towards athletics as a school kid, and picked up rowing in college, won a national championship, and then I got the chance to train for the Olympics. And the strange thing is, you said in my bio I was second in the Olympic trials, which I was, and one of the few Americans to ever race the World Cup. I raced the World Cup for 3 years in the single scull. But I just had a terrible motivation. What I was trying to do was create an image instead of being motivated by something that was really positive. And building up this image continued after the Olympics and after my rowing career by going to a top business school, and then setting my one thing at the time was 40 by 40. I wanted to make a net worth of $40 million by the time I was 40 years old. And the really strange thing is, that's what almost killed me, I think. And the fact that I was constantly living with this low level fear that a lot of your listeners may relate to. And the way I dealt with it, Jeff, was drinking. I'd have 7 or 8 beers every night, and then double that on weekends.
So I'm imagining being in that moment where you're essentially chasing a false goal, right? It's not founded in purpose. And
yeah,
you get to the point that you probably hit a rock bottom moment. What happened?
Well, so it wasn't even not founding in purpose. I was building this cocoon around me, Jeff. I was building a shell because I had so much shame and guilt about the real me that I assumed no one could ever love that kid. No one could ever love the kid who's just absolutely afraid of everything. And so I was running a technology startup. I'm driving around a $150,000 car wearing $10,000 suits in a startup with 20 people, and thinking, I'm Gordon Gekko or something like that, because it was part of this persona that I was trying to live with. But I was terrified of everything. I mean, I was afraid my CTO was going to quit and go to a competitor. We had all these great clients. I was afraid they were going to go find someone new, and my board was going to come down on me. And so I could never really be my authentic self. And this could happen to any one of your listeners. One morning I went to the gym and started doing my normal morning routine, and put a couple 100 pounds on the lat pull down machine, jumped on it, tried to move the thing, and just had this shooting pain up my arm. And I thought, well, that's okay. I'll go do cardio and give my arm a rest. Must have pulled a muscle or stretched a tendon. And then I had my normal routine, which is, running from one meeting to the next, drinking, starting at about 6 o'clock, going to a networking event until about midnight, 7 or 8 beers, bleary-eyed drive home. And then next morning, I'm feeling guilty, that whole Irish Catholic thing. So I got to get up and sweat it out again. And I went to the gym the second time, and my arm was just on fire. It was,
Hey, Patrick, I think we lost you, man. Hold on. Folks, can you still hear Patrick, or did you lose him too? Go ahead and just let me know. No, Patrick. Hold on. I think we lost you. So we're just going to do this. You're on speakerphone. Keep rolling. So you went back to the gym and you've got shooting pain. Your arm is on fire.
Yeah, the arm's on fire. And then just terrified to go to the doctor's office. So day 3 rolls around and I can barely get out of bed, barely move the arm. It's red and angry. And he looks at me and he says, boy, that's a pretty bad staph infection. We see that with guys who go to the gym all the time. We'll get you on some antibiotics, take a blood test, and the nurse will call you back in the afternoon. And as you know, Jeff, the nurse didn't call me back. The doctor did. And he said, I don't know what it is, but we can't figure that out here at Reston Hospital. So we're going to send you up to best hospital in the world, Johns Hopkins, and they'll get you sorted out. And 24 hours later, I'm in a sterile white room at Hopkins with more tubes and wires stuck in me than the space shuttle. And this, doctor oncologist walks in with 3 kids who look like they were about old enough to be on the soccer team he coaches after work. And he stops and he says, wow, this one's really interesting. His T cells have gone rogue and they've attacked his whole immune system. It doesn't work at all anymore. And he's saying this across the room like I'm not even there. And I said, yo, doc, my hearing still works. And your listeners probably know that Hopkins is a teaching hospital. So that day I was the lesson, and it turned out to be a really rare form of leukemia. And the next thing the doctor says is, at this point, my wife's at home. She's with our 1-year-old daughter. And the doctor says, let me just ask you something. Are your affairs in order? And that's, as you know, doctor speak for you're screwed. And did I also mention my wife's 6 months pregnant too?
No.
So, yeah. So that was my moment of clarity, Jeff. That was the moment when everything changed for me.
I'm trying to imagine myself in your shoes with a 1-year-old, a baby on the way, being asked, are your affairs in order, that's not a good prognosis. What happens from there?
I just broke down. I lost it. I couldn't believe that I was going to die at 35 years old, and had missed out. My biggest fear in my life had been because of, like all of us, something that happened when I was a kid. saw a plane crash on TV in Boston and crash at Logan Airport. And so I grew up terrified of planes, along with all the other fears I had. So I was in Hopkins, and I thought I wasted my entire life. I said, I'm 35 years in. I've never been true to myself. I've never found myself. The memory my daughter is going to have of her dad was a guy who was too afraid to get on a plane and take her to Disney World. And I was just filled with this tremendous sense of shame and regret because all the decisions I made were based on fear. And when I got to the end of my life, and that's where I was at Hopkins, was looking into the abyss, and I said, there's obviously a huge mistake I've made. I don't understand why, but if I get out of here, I'm gonna do something about that. I'm gonna get over this fear of flying. So that was my initial goal, was to get out of there. And then it's funny because you talk about the anchoring your purpose and your motivation. I hardly spent any time with my daughter up until that point, and my wife was taking care of everyone. I'm working 80 hours a week, all chasing that the singular goal of 40 by 40, and I just missed out on my whole life. And I had this amazing daughter and a wonderful wife and some great friends, and they were all put way on the back burner at that point. And I'm watching this like I'm watching a movie of how some guy really screwed up what could have been a great life.
So obviously you beat cancer because you're still here. And
yeah, well, you have to just give away the end there.
You're still here. This is not a recording. I'm curious what that journey started to look like, because you come out with a book called Fear is Fuel. How did you take something that had crippled you for 35 years and suddenly use it to propel you?
Well, that's the amazing thing. When and I said at the start of this, what would you do if fear never got in your way? And in fact, if it could help power you on. What I didn't know at the time is that there's something on the other side of fear, and that is opportunity. And we only make decisions. Every decision we've ever made can be distilled down into two choices. Either you make a decision out of fear, and that almost always leads to regret and shame and guilt, or you make a decision out of opportunity, and that leads to happiness and to growth and to success and fulfillment. And what I didn't know is there are two really interesting parts of the brain that are responsible for each one of those. And so when I got out of Hopkins, I remember walking out in a really dreary November day. It was, rainy and drizzly out, and I walked out with my wife, and it's in a pretty crummy area in Baltimore. And I walked out with Kristen, and I saw this leaf in a puddle. And I would have been, the old Sweeney would have been rushing out, worried about the next meeting, worried about the next sales cycle. And I stopped, and I looked at this leaf, and I said to my wife, I said, this sounds really corny, but that's probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I just stopped, and it was clear that the old me did die in Hopkins, and the new me was incredibly present. And what I found out is that the present, when you're present, it holds potential, and the past is generally just filled with fear. So what we default to on those decisions, because the brain, the older part of the brain, the more powerful part of the brain, is something called the amygdala. And it's a little gland at the base of your brain, and that handles the fight, flight, or freeze response. That is fully developed at birth. And so as kids, when we face trauma, and trauma can be anything from being called up in the front of class and not knowing an answer to having your parents killed in a car accident. As kids, we've got all sorts of trauma. We only have the ability to use the amygdala, so the center for fear, because the center for courage, that prefrontal cortex, the smart part of our brain, that isn't fully developed until we're in our early 20s. And most people don't know that, but what happens is when we're afraid, the default is defense. right? So most people don't know that when you're scared and when you get to that moment, you actually have a choice. You can choose courage, and it's presenting you with an opportunity to grow and to be better and to be smarter. And that's what I learned when I stepped out of Hopkins. I just didn't know the neuroscience behind it.
Mm. So walk us through, because you fast forward, I mean, you've had a very successful entrepreneurial career. You've had a very successful career as an athlete. You've now been in the position where you go in and you train Navy SEALs. I mean, you've worked with some of the best of the best. What are some stories of how you've had to transform your fear into fuel?
Well, I think probably the most interesting, the one I really enjoy telling is there's been a couple. One has been very business oriented and some risks I took in business. But the more exciting one was when I decided to do the Iditarod Trail Invitational. And for your listeners who don't know, the Iditarod is traditionally a dog sled race across Alaska in February. So the coldest time of year, these dog sleds race across Alaska. And it was originally in early 1900s to bring medicine to this town that was iced in and ships couldn't get up there. And then it turned into an annual race for, whatever it is, the past 100 years or something. And every year they invite 40 adventure athletes to do it either on foot or on fat bikes. And so I ended up getting invited to do the Iditarod, and it's from Anchorage to McGrath, Alaska, and it was a race. So it was literally, about 500 kilometers long. Excuse me, and we're racing, and which means we're not sleeping. So I was sleeping about an hour and a half each night. I jumped into a bivy sack, get just enough sleep to where I could start to refocus. And on the fourth night, and I think I was in ninth place, but I hadn't seen anyone for a day and a half, and we were about 300 miles from the nearest road. And and on the fourth night, I'm following the snowmobile trail, which you don't have any GPS when you're up there. It was minus 35 degrees. My eyelid, one eyelid had frozen together, and you have to follow a compass. And at night, I was basically keeping Orion, the constellation, on my left, and just that kept me going west. And I was sitting there, and it was in the late afternoon of the fourth day, and there was a sign on the snowmobile trail that says, McGrath, 8 miles or something like that. And I thought, well, I'm doing about 3 miles an hour in the snow, so let's figure if I can really kick it, it's 2.5 hours. So I said, I'm going to dump any extra weight. So I got rid of my fuel from my stove. I dumped most of my food, and I just started cranking. And I figured I'm going to get there. An hour later, as it's getting dark, it starts snowing. Now, if it snowed and I lost that snowmobile trail I was on, then I wouldn't be able to do anything because it was getting dark out. So I'd literally have to bivvy and sleep until it was light enough to continue to move forward on the snow and follow a compass. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I hope, it doesn't snow that much more. And then I got to within probably 4 or 5 miles of the town, and I saw the beacon from the airport flashing green and white. And at one moment, it's sort of at my 1 o'clock, and then the next moment it's at my 3 o'clock. And it was clear that I was going, around in circles, trying to figure out how to get there. And I've got no food, I've got no water, and there's probably 1.5 inches of snow, maybe 2 inches of snow on the ground. And I come around this corner, and in the snow, right across the path, is a paw print about the size of my hand, and I got some big ass hands. So this paw print was clearly a wolf, and all I could think to myself is, if I see a bunch more of these and there's a pack of wolves out here, then it's swing dog for dinner. And so it was definitely scary because there's no calling help. There's nothing I can do. And let me tell you, even after 4 days and no sleep, I had a serious fear cocktail coursing through my body. I'm pumping that bike like you wouldn't believe. And about 45 minutes or an hour later, I saw a road that led into town, and ended up finishing the race and then sleeping for about 48 hours straight.
What do you learn from that?
Geez, what do I learn from that? That's a good question. I don't know. Bring a choke collar just in case.
You think?
That's a good.
Go ahead.
I think what I learned, and the reason I do this stuff, is I went from being such a wimp and such a sissy, Jeff, that when I got out of Hopkins, the first thing I did was take flying lessons. And I got my private pilot's license. And the very first day that I went out, I literally peed 4 times before we even got in the plane. And the second time we hit this little bit of turbulence, and I'm not ashamed to say I pooped myself, just a little bit, right? Like not a lot. And the most bizarre thing happened though. After like the 5th or 6th lesson, I fell in love with flying, and I absolutely found the most satisfaction and fulfillment. Like, I got my instrument rating. I went on and I got my commercial rating. I got my seaplane rating. And now I fly aerobatics competitively and, basically a stunt pilot. And I was terrified my whole life of flying. And then when I found courage, and when I started engaging that part of the brain responsible for courage, everything changed. Like my business changed, my relationships changed. And I was working a lot less, but my businesses were getting more and more successful. I was incredibly authentic with my employees, saying, "Hey, look, I've been in the hospital and out for a couple of months. We might be going out of business because we lost this contract, we lost that contract. I don't know what's going to happen." And they were looking at the guy who used to be the cheerleader, and I've got everything taken care of. You guys don't worry. Heads down, get back to work. Blah blah blah. And all of a sudden I'm the real me, and they're coming back with better ideas, and they're being radically transparent about looking for other jobs, about everything else. And so was I, and the whole culture of the company changed. My relationship with my wife changed. And so what do I learn from seeing a wolf print in the middle of the night is that I wanted to keep pushing myself to see what I could accomplish, because what revealed itself to me, Seth Godin talks about the hidden prize. I found courage and my life changed, and I was so much happier and more fulfilled. But the hidden prize was all like the greatest joy and the most fulfillment and the most success was on the other side of fear. And all my dreams were on the other side of fear. So I kept trying to find fear again. I wanted to see what was on the other side of it.
Yeah, I love
that. So that's that's why I keep doing this crazy stuff.
That's great. That's great. I'm curious for those of you who are here live, what are the questions that are coming up for you? Because it's a live webinar. This is your chance to interact as well. So go ahead and start sharing some of your questions inside the chat box real quick. Patrick, I'm putting you down for a second so I can take a drink of water.
Everybody has done what I'm talking about, Jeff. So tell me the scariest thing you've ever done.
What's the scariest thing you've ever done? Put that in the questions box. I love that.
And let's start out with you, my friend.
Oh, great. Scariest. Skydiving's up there.
Yeah.
Skydiving's up there. Yeah, I mean, that was the first time that I felt like I was actually faced with, I'm about to make a decision that actually legitimately could be life or death.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I remember as a kid. So there are some people that don't know this. I used to be a professional hip hop dancer. Didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. I know that.
You know that. He saw some moves.
I've seen many versions of that.
But I remember as a kid going up to perform for the first time, that scared me so much because I got bullied in school, and it was the first time that I had to step up in front of a group of people and be judged, and to authentically be myself before I would know that that would mean that I'd be actually accepted. So
Accepted,
yeah, that's up there too.
Okay, let me ask you another question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the scariest thing you didn't do?
It comes down to vulnerability, actually. There are certain moments in my life where, for some reason, I hold back from saying things because I think it goes to a level of and depth of feeling that I don't know if I can control the emotion, and so I bury it.
Yeah. So that's the reason I asked both those questions of you and of everyone who's live on the webinar. Is that is you, depending on what your motivation is, that is you choosing either to let the fear center. Remember that the default is to defense. All right, when the amygdala kicks in, we default to that fear reaction. But the present is what holds potential. And so when you choose to do something that's scary, you're choosing opportunity. And you're telling fear, screw you, I'm going to choose opportunity. So when you did, your hip hop performance, you were probably terrified. You talked about the vulnerability and everything else, but you did it anyways. You moved forward. Same with the skydiving, of course. When you weren't motivated and you defaulted to that defense, then you ended up not letting your real feelings out, not telling people what you thought or how it impacted you or whatever. So every decision we've ever made, if you look at it, can come back down to fear or opportunity. And so what we have to do, and this is the reason, the premise of the book, the whole premise of this platform, is we have to scare ourselves every single day. We need to find more fear in our life. And most people don't get that. They try and avoid fear. But in truth, we want to find more fear and get used to that and then learn how to use that as fuel, because when a fear kicks in, we produce this fear cocktail. That amygdala, that small gland at the base of your brain, starts to produce DHEA, cortisol, adrenaline, all these different chemicals and hormones, and they give us superhuman power. We get much better mental acuity, we get stronger, all these things, so we can make really good decisions when we're in that state. But the key is you have to know how to control it, and that's the platform I lay out on in the book, how we can access that courage center, how we can make much better decisions, and it's after interviewing 36 of the world's top neuroscientists over the past 6 years, and it's amazing. The bottom line is you don't have to have a near-death experience to figure it out.
Yeah, that's really good. Can you do me a favor? Can you screen the questions and ask them to me when they come in? So you talk about this idea of us having to scare ourselves every single day, and the key is how to leverage it after the fact. Walk us through some practical things that people can put into action immediately following our time together.
Yeah, you bet. So if your listeners take away anything, it would be that when you scare yourself, try and purposefully scare yourself. So let's go back to someone who's terrified of being judged or being an imposter or something like that, or someone who doesn't like public speaking. If you've got a listener who's afraid of public speaking, then I want those people to commit to making a toast the next time they're out with a bunch of coworkers. To stand up, make a toast. And what I want you to notice, particularly when you do it, just say, look, here's all the hard work that we've all done, or whatever you can come up with that's a 10-word toast. And it might be really uncomfortable, but you can do that. And when you do, notice the physical changes that take place in your body, because everybody has what I call fear tells. And when the amygdala kicks in, when that little gland, again, at the base of your brain, that thing's running a 2 million-year-old piece of software. And the only thing the amygdala cares about is passing your genes on to the next generation. Doesn't care about happiness, doesn't care about success, doesn't care about fulfillment. It only cares about survival. So it's going to make a decision based on survival. When you're threatened with something, and that threat can be abandonment from the tribe, it can be rejection, it can be height, anything that your amygdala sees as the most minuscule threat it's going to have a reaction. When you have a reaction, you get a physiological change that's always the same in your body. So for some people, it's butterflies in your stomach. For some people, it's a tight jaw. For other people, it might be a rapid heartbeat. Some people might have a brick in their stomach. But what I want you to do is purposely scare yourself. Notice what changes take place in your body. And then for the next week afterwards, notice every time you sense that feeling again. Because what we don't know and what most people don't understand is when we sense that feeling, we don't have to default to that reactionary fear choice. But most people think we do, because remember that the default is defense, right? We go right back to the amygdala, fight, flight, or freeze. When I get that sensation, I'm out of here. I'm going to get out of this uncomfortable situation. Or, when someone cuts me off, even if she's an 80-year-old woman who can't see out of her glasses, cuts me off in traffic, I'm going to give her the finger. And then you realize, like, what the hell am I doing? And it's the amygdala that's making those defensive decisions. So if you can get used to that fear, if you can understand when your body's happening, then you can say, okay, the present is what holds the potential. I have the choice to make something, a decision that might be uncomfortable, but that's going to lead to growth, and it's going to lead to happiness, and it's going to lead to some other more interesting opportunities. And so just by scaring yourself and starting to recognize that, you can start to practice understanding when you have the choice between fear and opportunity.
It's so interesting. My wife and I, for the past year, have been going to a marriage coach. I had this realization every area of my life. As a kid, I had parents. In every sport, I had a coach. In school, I had teachers. I've always had mentors and coaches in my business. And the single relationship that mattered most, the relationship with my wife, I didn't have that person. And so the last year, we started going there. And the first thing she had us do was, in the moments that Amy and I would get charged, when one of us would start to shut down, that was exactly what she challenged us to do. What are you feeling? What's happening in your body? Can you even be aware of it? For me, it's tightness in my chest, and I start to feel a tingling sensation through my torso. And just that awareness of it led to a choice versus a reaction.
That's exactly right. And it allows you, so the method that I lay out in the book is called the BASE method. And the second, the A, stands for assessing the situation. And when we let the amygdala, when we default to that defense and let the amygdala stay in charge, what we're doing is, it's like driving one of these video games. I've got two boys, 13 and 14 years old, and one of the games that they love to play on the Wii is this driving game. And you can either take the perspective that you're sitting behind the wheel and looking at the race course like you're going down the course, or you can get up in the helicopter that's filming it, and you can see all the curves ahead, you can see the other cars, you can see any hazards in the road. And when we default to that defense, we're just looking over the steering wheel, and we can only see one thing in front of us. So if you can feel those changes in your body and say, I'm going to step back and assess the situation. I'm going to look at it like a producer making a movie. I'm going to get up in that helicopter and look down at the whole race course, look down at everything going on. Because if you go back to, flipping off grandma in the car in traffic, and you were to take yourself out of that situation and look down from a helicopter, you'd say, who's that clown giving that poor old lady the finger, right? Because you're able to assess the situation and understand that you're just having a fight, flight, or freeze reaction.
I love that. I'm curious, a question came in. How do you balance the responsibility of being a husband and a father with putting yourself in situations where you're at risk on a regular basis?
I've got about $3 million of life insurance, Jeff. So I actually get that question a lot. And my wife, I think, appreciated what I went through when I almost died in a hospital with a bunch of tubes and wires in myself, and having not lived. And, one of the things that when I recovered and I started flying, I said, look, I almost died and I never lived. I didn't ever push myself outside of comfort level of comfort. I was never happy or satisfied with the authentic me. I was always looking to the future and never living in the present. And so when I said, I'm gonna start doing adventure races. I'm gonna do the race across America. I'm gonna climb this mountain. I'm gonna go out to Yosemite to climb El Cap. And I started doing all this stuff. I changed as a person. And one of the things, as Jeff knows, every one of my emails is signed Magna Vitae Memento Mori, which is live big and remember your death. So I think, for me, I would much rather die doing something, exciting and adventurous and hopefully inspiring, to give people the idea that, look, we're all going to die, and it doesn't matter what we do. Everyone's going to die at some point. So you can either live before you die, or you can live in fear of dying.
What practical steps would you suggest for people to face fear daily?
That's a really individualized question, Jeff, because it all depends on what your fears are. And I think it's probably easiest, sadly, to do it at work, because so many people are afraid of being their authentic self, or afraid of being an imposter, or afraid of failing, or are afraid of success,
or afraid to say no.
Yeah, afraid to say no. I mean, there's all sorts of opportunities within work, and some of the businesses I've worked with have really embraced the idea of creating a culture of courage, and some have just given it lip service. One of the biggest internet successes of the early days brought me in a year ago, and they said, we want to foster a culture of courage, and I ended up interviewing a bunch of people beforehand, and I said, tell me about your product development and how you're looking at new innovation and how you make decisions. And they said, oh, we bring in the best talent and the youngest minds and the people who deal directly with the customers and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, then how's the decision made? And they said, oh, that comes down to the hippo. I said, what's a hippo? And they said, it's the highest paid person's opinion. And I said, you got to be kidding me. So they actually offered me, and I've got a team of coaches I work with who actually do a lot of the implementing of this stuff, and they offered us a long-term contract, a one-year contract to come in and help them define a culture of courage and implement it. And we said no. We said there isn't the support here, and you're not really dedicated to it as a company. And so it is so easy to be great in business. It is so easy to differentiate yourself and stand out by having courage. So if you have the confidence to say what you really feel, to criticize people in a way that's coming from your heart to make the company better, to make that person better. But most people don't even like to do that, because they think, oh, well, they'll think I'm an asshole, or they won't understand how I think, and I can't do that, or I don't have the title to do that, and there's all these fears. So it is so easy to differentiate yourself just by being courageous at work. And as soon as you feel it during the day, you'll get an email from a customer or a boss or a colleague, and you'll say, well, the truth is this, but I could never tell them that. And if you ever catch yourself saying that, then number one, you're not being true to yourself. And number two, you're doing that person a disservice by not presenting the authentic you.
Yeah, I love that. What Salima just asked a very interesting question. What would you say to your kids if they said, okay, Dad, I see what you do. I want to start facing fear every single day. What guidance would you give them so that they can follow in your footsteps while also still be safe?
Yeah. So I think, this is actually a project I'm working on, because I feel really passionate about this. We are, as a society, really doing our children a disservice by the amount of protection we put on them. So, and the amount of structure. So there are two things that the brain needs to develop into a healthy adult. And one of it is open, free, and what most kids refer to as just really boring time. And most parents, and I'm in this group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and we're super guilty of it because we've got kids going to violin lessons, and then they go to French lessons, and then they go to soccer practice, and their whole day is structured. And what that does is it eliminates, and most schools have taken away recesses, and a lot have taken away phys ed class. And so there's no unstructured downtime for them to solve problems on their own, for them to look at challenges. And when I say solve problems, I don't mean, choose between a everything bagel and an egg bagel. I mean, actually learn how to make some bagels and feed yourself lunch because you're hungry. And so the disservice we're doing our kids is not giving them coming of age opportunities, not giving them opportunities to be creative and even think about these things. Then it's manifested itself in tremendous increase in suicide rates, especially among boys, and an awful lot of anxiety. The people who report that they've got mental illness, it's the third largest cause of hospitalization in the U.S., mental illness. And everyone who is under the age of 65, of all that population, half the people in the U.S. report having some sort of mental distress and anxiety. And so all of that comes down to, a lot of it comes down to our upbringing and trying to control things we can't control, and not understanding the decision-making process. So with kids, I think it's super important to get them out of their comfort zone, because remember, they don't have the adult supervision of their brain fully developed until they're in their mid-20s. So you can get them into a situation that scares them, and instead of fighting with them, like, the good old blue-collar Irish Catholic upbringing in Boston was, if you're afraid of something, your father or your grandfather is just going to start screaming at you until you do it. And what that's doing is just activating your amygdala, right? So all it's doing is turning on the fight response, because it's all you've got when you're a kid. So as parents, we have to be a surrogate prefrontal cortex. And that helps them create the connections to their developing prefrontal cortex. That's the adult supervision part of the brain. So if you look at something like taking them to a rock climbing gym, right? There's every major city in the U.S. now has some great rock climbing gyms. It's a super safe sport, but it's also scary because the kids go up high on equipment that they have to trust. And so, you can see it at the gym all the time, or in some of the climbing spots around the world, where kids go up, they get to the top, and they're waiting for mom or dad to lower them down, and then they just flip out because they realize they've got to trust the equipment. And you'll see some parents, like I did before I knew the neuroscience, start screaming at their kids, come on down, let go, I'm going to lower you down. No, I can't, Dad, I'm scared. Let go now, or there's no ice cream after dinner. Dad, I can't, I'm going to die. Let go, or this is the last time we go climbing. And all you're doing is sitting there just feeding fuel to that fight response that he's having. Instead, what we should do is step back and say, okay, if you think you're going to fall, are you falling right now? No, but I could, the rope might break. Yeah, but right now in the present, are you falling? No. Okay, well, let go with one hand and put a little tension on the rope. No, I can't, I might die. And you sit there and you go through the rational thought with that child, and they start to learn the same thing, and they start to create that connection to the courage center within their brain. So it's super important now, more than ever, that we get kids out of their comfort zone, that we let them do things independently and figure things out on their own, because that's how the brain was designed to evolve and to learn and to populate our own database and what's called our prior beliefs. Because at the end of the day, the brain is a prediction engine. Yeah. And the more experiences we have, the more we're able to predict things.
I love that. Folks, we got about 15 minutes left, so if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the questions box. And while those come in, Patrick, you mentioned that you had a special surprise for the people if they pre-order the book.
I do. So we have the pre-order contest, and Jeff is the sole recipient of this. So you guys have to promise to keep this a secret. You can't tell anyone, because the official Serious Fuel pre-order contest ended at midnight last night when the book launched. And because Jeff and I couldn't get the podcast, the webinar together till today, we're extending it for you guys. And anyone who buys the book within the next 24 hours, they have to they can go on to the website, Serious Fuel, and just drop us an email. Then they're eligible for a bunch of great prizes. And the prizes include an adventure weekend with me, Finding Your Own Fear, a one-on-one mountain bike ride with Lance Armstrong, who's a good friend of mine. And then you get to sit in on his Tour de France podcast. That's in July in Aspen, Colorado. 5 great book bundles that are all from New York Times bestselling authors. Mark Devine, who wrote The Way of the Seal, Joe DeSena, who wrote The Spartan Way, Ben Greenfield, who wrote Boundless. And so I've got 5 of those to give away as well. And here's how you do it. You go buy the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whoever, capture a screenshot of the book and your payment on it, email it into us. And Jeff, I don't know if you can put our email and the web address and that sort of thing in the show notes, but email that into us. For everyone who does this contest, we're donating a book to a veteran who's struggling with PTSD. So it's good karma. There's some great prizes. You get 2 entries for buying the book. You get an extra 3 entries for buying the book and posting a picture of you with it on social media, and another 3 entries for, I think it's 3 entries, don't quote me on that, for leaving a review on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. So that's the Serious Fuel contest, pre-order contest, and you guys, through the one thing, have 24 hours to take advantage of that.
So you stuck it in the middle, and I think people might have glazed over it. You're friends with Lance Armstrong, so walk us through how that all his thing came about.
Oh man, it's a good story over beers. So I was very adamant. I had been beaten in my rowing career by guys who were doing growth hormones, and there was no test for them back at the time. So I was adamant against anti-doping, as was Lance when he was in the Olympics. And he realized that everybody was doping and went back. And as we all know, he got caught, and he did that horrible interview on Oprah where he showed no remorse. And for me, that was heartbreaking, because he was definitely one of my heroes and one of the greatest all-time athletes. And he was just tough as nails, and I loved everything about his story with cancer and all the things he was doing for it. But then, he had the biggest fall from grace, as he says. And then I think it was a year and a half ago, he was on CNBC, and he was doing an interview, and he said, I got 5 kids, and I've had to look at the video of me testifying back in the day for some of these lawsuits. And he said, if my kids ever acted like that, I'd kick them out of the house. He said, I couldn't believe what, just how egotistical and maniacal I was. And so when he said that, I said, okay, well, he's possibly feeling the remorse and everything else, but I wasn't a hater anymore, but I definitely wasn't back in his camp. And then I've done a lot of angel investing. I'm in about 3 dozen different startups. And through some of the folks that I've worked with, he's starting a venture fund called Next Ventures. And one of my companies wanted to meet him. We ended up connecting, meeting each other in Aspen, and just hit it off. And he's a super complex guy, but he has just done an amazing job reinventing himself. He's going to join us at MV Relentless this year. Yeah. So any of you guys who are looking to do that seminar or that conference, which is spectacular. I mean, just really, really high quality talent and people there. And, I think he has, I mean, a great example is him donating that prize, Jeff, because I said, look, I'm doing this, and everyone who buys in the pre-order is going to get a copy sent to a vet. And he said, look, I'll tweet it out to my 3 million followers. And so he tweeted it out to his 3 million followers, and he said, how about I give a prize? And I said, yeah, sure, Lance, sign a picture or something like that. And he said, no, how about a ride with me on a mountain bike? And then they can sit in when I do my Tour de France show. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Because he has no motivation. He's not getting anything out of it. So it just, he's really impressed me as someone who's done a admirable job of reinventing himself.
Yeah, very, very cool. Questions? Oh, sorry. Here we go. Interesting. How does this apply to a person's faith walk, the process of getting over yourself?
Their faith walk?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say when I talked about motivation, so I clearly hadn't even come close to getting over myself. I was all about trying to cover up myself, right, with money or with athletic success. And I think as I often say, that because of some great doctors at Hopkins and some visualization techniques I learned in the Olympics, and ultimately by the grace of God, I ended up getting out of Hopkins with that rare form of leukemia and overcoming it. And what I think that did for me was that faith helped me access a different kind of motivation. And what you'll find from a neuroscience perspective is we've got something called a reward center. And the reward center is where we produce dopamine. And dopamine is something that gives us a good feeling. And it's almost the exact same feeling we get from cocaine or from methamphetamine. And what we found, and what neuroscientists have found, is the higher people are on a social structure, meaning the more social interaction they have face-to-face with people and enjoying life, the less likely they are to be addictive, and the less likely they are to have physical problems. And I think, there's a rise in alcoholism, there's a rise in opioid problems and everything else. And that's because the millennial generation and younger is spending more and more time trying to get that social interaction with an electronic device. And there's less and less physical interaction. When you have that physical interaction and that community and that sense of faith, and the community can be, your church, it can be a hockey team, it can be a bunch of different things, but that social interaction actually increases the amount of dopamine we get, which then strengthens the connection between however we got that before. So then, it becomes a circular loop that the more time you spend with friends, the more motivated you are to be with those friends, the better you feel, the healthier you are.
I love that. I love that. So what I would love to do for everybody who's here live, out of everything we've talked about here today, what is the one biggest aha you have gotten so far? Go ahead and put that in the questions box. I'd love to hear that.
I'd love to hear that as well. Yeah,
and
me too.
I saw
How about
Martina.
you, Jeff?
Well, I saw Martina's comment. She said, I just realized that a lot of the stress I feel is based on fear. I now realize that I don't suffer from stress. I suffer from fear.
Amen. That's a good one.
I thought that was, you said one about being in the present. What was that?
So the big thing is that our default is defense.
Yeah.
And defense is all about the past, right? We're thinking about traumas that we have and how they hurt us in the past. So our default is defense, but the present is what holds potential.
Yep. That was mine. Because when I think about over the last 4 years, I mean, I remember Jay told me so early on, you've got to live the one thing to stay in business with us. And it was so much about striking counterbalance. And I remember the day that I walked into the house and I was sitting on the couch with my family, telling myself that I was being present with them, but I was actually in my inbox. And my wife called me on it.
Yeah.
And over the last 4 years, I've formed habits where I truly do shut down work. I truly am present at home, and the possibilities in my marriage and in my relationships with my kids are just, it's night and day. It's night and day. So
well, and you know, Jeff, going back to the question about kids, what we model as parents, they pick up on tremendously, right? So if we're sitting on the phone and half listening to a story our partner's telling us, or you know, saying, just a minute, kids, I'll be at the dinner table in a second, or you know, whatever, they're going to model that exact same behavior. And if we do little stuff with our kids, I mean, one of the great 5-minute exercises, and you can do this in cars because we've got a no screen rule in the car. So, you know, kids aren't allowed to have their phone or their iPads in the car, even on long trips. So one of the things we'll do, you know, silly stuff like I Spy or the license plate alphabet game or things like that. But a really good one is seeing who can come up with the most uses for something. And just a silly game like that, you say, okay, kids, how many uses can you come up with for a brick? And you know, they can either do it in their head or just a piece of paper or whatever. And that really starts to build the connection and creativity, because it's really the most important type of intelligence we have. All the IQ tests and you know, SATs and that sort of thing, those type of tests measure basic static intelligence, but it's really creativity and you know, diverse thinking that's much more valuable in life and business and relationships.
Love that. I love that. So Lucy shared, I need to scare myself more. Paul shared, by facing fear, you begin to change how you respond. Alexander said, I just realized I need more social interaction to overcome my fear of rejection. That noticing what feeling in your body will clue you into making better decisions on the opportunity. Kaylee says, what is the scariest thing you don't do? ? How many things that I've passed up on due to fear? Jacob says,
that's so regretful.
Yeah, Jacob says, I'm not alone. Many of us has fears. It's time to start acting on it and facing on it. So folks, we want to thank you for your attention and for playing all out and going inward and asking the question, how can you apply this? Our hope is, when you really think about it, we're in the business of time. It's our most valuable resource. And the challenge is most people spend their time instead of investing it. And even just answering that question at the end was the difference between a spending of time and an investment. Because now you at least know one thing you can walk away and begin to do differently. So if you'd like to check out Patrick's book, the website is fearisfuel.com. You can also find it on Amazon. And I think it's pretty cool. I asked him right before that. I said, dude, I know the book launched, but can you open it back up just for us for 24 hours? And he literally did do that just for us, out of the goodness of his heart. So please go check out the book. Patrick, any final thing you'd like to share with us?
I would say if you guys want to hit me up on Instagram, it's the Fear Guru there, and PJ Sweeney on Twitter. I'm happy to help if anyone has any questions, wants more information, you know, is interested in having me come to your company or school or conferences or whatever. I'm always willing and able, because my mission is to help everyone in the world figure out how to use fear as fuel and courage, because I think that ultimately will lead to world peace.
Love it, man. Well, thank you for coming on, and I'm excited to see you in a few months.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. It was a great honor. I really appreciate it. I hope all your listeners got something out of it, and we'll see you in the video.
Yep, sounds good, man.
All right, thanks, brother.
All right, everyone. Well, there you have it, our conversation with Patrick Sweeney. Thank you so much for investing your time with us here today. We will have an upcoming webinar in March as well as in April. And if there's somebody that you would like to see on the One Thing webinar or the One Thing podcast, shoot us an email at events@theonething.com. That's events, EVENTS, at theonething.com with the number 1 in the URL. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Yeah.